It's your girl Nancy Red, and this is season 3 of Mompreneurs, where every week we celebrate beautiful Black entrepreneurs who are simultaneously amazing business moguls and awesome moms. We're listening to their life stories and inspiring advice. Now, today is an amazing day in Mompreneurs history because y'all know I started this podcast because entrepreneurship literally saved my family. My grandparents were entrepreneurs, my parents were entrepreneurs, and I genuinely believe in entrepreneurship's role in creating generational wealth in our community and fixing a lot of our ills. And we're now coming full circle because I'm speaking to an incredible woman whose brilliance and care for our community has actually genuinely changed the lives of some of our other mompreneurs in helping their businesses thrive. So thank goodness for Ayana Parsons, who is the co-founder of many amazing companies, most recently AKP Management, her first company that she co-founded with her husband, Yardstick Management, and she's also the co-founder of the Fearless Fund. Now, you probably know about the Fearless Fund, but I've got to remind you that it's the first venture capital firm that was created for women of color by women of color. And so important because alongside the Fearless Fund, which was created in 2019 to help eradicate racial and gender disparities in venture capital, the Fearless Fund has also invested $30 million in over 40 companies. And we've got so many other things to talk about, including her thriving career as a leadership consultant, her kids, and so much more. We are very lucky to speak with you today. Welcome, Ayana.
Thank you for having me, Nancy. I'm so excited. And thank you for doing all that you do, just
Aw.
pouring into mompreneurs like myself and many others. I'm so happy to be
We
here.
You know the importance of it, right? Because these streets are rough, and if
Oh,
you can get a little bit of autonomy, a little bit of a personal foothold, it's still hard, but it doesn't feel as desperate, right?
that's so true. And we'll get into this, but these streets are rough. Kids are savages. And so, managing them and trying to nurture them as they grow and evolve while also trying to manage, thriving businesses is a huge challenge. And so if I can share parts of my story and that helps some other mompreneurs, I am happy to do it.
I love it. Okay, well, let's start with who actually makes you a mompreneur. Talk to us about your household and your daughters.
Yes. So I have two daughters. My oldest daughter is Ebby Noel, and she's 12. She's in seventh grade. And my youngest daughter is Nura, and she is in first grade. She's 6 years old. And the cool thing about my daughters and my husband, Ebby, is that all of their names mean light in some language. So typically Aramaic or Hebrew. And so I constantly say in my household, I am surrounded by light, and they just bring so much love, so much energy, and sometimes headaches, and we'll get into that. But that is my squad.
I love that. And I laugh because names mean a lot to me. Anyone who listens knows my name is Nancy, and my daughter's name is Nancy. My name is Nancy Amanda. My mom's name is Amanda. My grandmother's name is Nancy. Her mother's name was Amanda, and her mother's name was Nancy. And I laugh. I was like, that's what we got from slavery. We got Nancy and Amanda. And you also have deep roots in the South, right? Like both of your parents also went to HBCUs like mine. And all of this having the Southern background, having the HBCU background, that sets a tone in the household. And you've said that your mother was an activist. And
Yeah.
was she an activist and an entrepreneur, or was that something that you came later on to life? Like, how did your household influence your interest in entrepreneurship?
Yeah, well, what's so interesting is that in a lot of ways, my household um, detracted me from entrepreneurship, and I'll tell you why. So, my mother was an education activist, but her career was a social worker. So, she worked for Department of Children. I say still works. She's well into her 70s, still working
Oh, I love
for
her.
Department of Children and Family Services. She worked for the Housing Authority, and so she's always had a heart for people. So, a career social worker who was also an education activist and the first Black woman president of the school board in our town of Hot Springs, Arkansas. My dad worked for the same company for almost 40 years and retired there. So, the company was Reynolds Metals Company, and he worked in the plant, and he was also a buyer. But on the side, my dad had at least 20 to 25 different side hustles. So my dad was the one that introduced me to entrepreneurship. And I tease him because he sold so much. He sold t-shirts. At one point, he had Ayana's designer perfume. He sold African medallions. He has sold hair weave. He has sold electronics. I mean, I love my dad. And, but he was this serial entrepreneur. And I saw firsthand just the challenges of trying to manage a side hustle. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do that. And so
I don't know if the ROI is there.
Yeah, I don't know if it's there.
Yeah. How much of your basement is filled with his own hustle?
Girl, we didn't have a basement. We had a carport growing up. So I'm like, at this point, we still have regular coaching sessions. He's probably on about his 30th business. And my father is an incredible chef. So that I'm trying to get him to focus on food, because he's focused on all of these other goods. And I'm like, it's right in front of you, Dad. Like, the ingredients are right in front of you. This is what you do better than anyone. I mean, he's won national barbecue competitions and all kinds of stuff in Memphis. And so I'm like, Dad, you got to lean into it. So that was my dad.
I love the fact that your dad, but what's really funny though, and did you have the traditional growing up, which we heard over and over again? I grew up in a factory town, and it was just like, get your job, you do your time, you get your pension. This did sound great. Little did they know, joke's on us, that doesn't exist anymore.
Oh yeah. I mean, not only that, the town that I grew up in Central Arkansas, it was very segregated. And so it was very clear that I had to get out, because as I looked around me, and I think still to this day, there's never been a Black mayor. I never had a Black doctor growing up, didn't know any Black lawyers. And so all the people in power and the successful entrepreneurs didn't look like me. And so, growing up around that, you start to question whether or not something is for you when you can't see it. But thankfully, I made my way to FAMU, and I saw so much brilliance and incredible diversity of Black people at FAMU. And that's really what sparked my passion for business, as well as a leadership development program that I did in high school called LEAD. I don't know if you're familiar with LEAD, but LEAD took me as a 16-year-old who'd never been on a plane to Philadelphia for a summer to study at Wharton and learn about all facets of business. And I was like, this is exactly what I want to do.
That's an amazing opportunity. And it kind of changed the game for you, obviously. And so when you got to college, when you saw all this diversity, when you saw people looking at you doing incredible things and doing them successfully, it still wasn't immediately like time for you to start your business, right? Was it? Did you go immediately into entrepreneurship, or did you dabble in, just figuring out just a professional career track, that the traditional way?
Yeah. So what's interesting is I went the professional career track and I worked in corporate America, but I found myself doing a lot of entrepreneurial stuff in corporate America. And so it was fascinating is when I look back on probably the first 10, 12 years of my career, I worked for companies like Pfizer, Philips, Procter & Gamble, Kimberly-Clark. I mean, these behemoth Fortune 500 companies. And I would go into those companies and be the one who was starting and scaling new businesses. So I was technically an intrapreneur within the safety net and kind of confines of corporate America. But that's where the bug, I think, really hit. Was corporate
Which
America.
Is wild. What an interesting insight, because working for a Fortune 500 company, you had the privilege, which a lot of us don't have, is you got to see just how much money is being made. Like the numbers, the zeros are unfathomable.
Yeah, I mean, just to give you some perspective, when I was 23, I think I was at the time, 23 or 24, I was working in New York City for Pfizer. I had been out in the field doing pharmaceutical sales in Memphis, Tennessee, and then I moved to New York City to Pfizer's headquarters, and I was working on the Zyrtec allergy medication team. Now, this is 20 years ago, but our marketing budget for Zyrtec allergy medication was $70 million. And that was 20 years ago. So when you talk about like these behemoth budgets and seeing, what big corporations were doing, I saw that firsthand, and benefited from it.
Absolutely. And you and your husband both looked at the situation. How did you go from having conversations about it after work to starting Yardstick, which was your first co-founding opportunity? At what point did you realize I don't need to just be building these companies for other people? I need to build my own company.
Well, let me also say, so there were some failure to launch opportunities before Yardstick. So we actually started a faith-based consulting company. It was called the Winans Group, with a dear friend, Marvin Winans, and we were going into churches and other organizations to help them with strategy consulting. It didn't pan out, but we learned so much from that then fed into the work that we were doing at Yardstick. But I have to give my husband a lot of credit, because him growing up in Detroit, I mean, he learned entrepreneurship at a very early age from his father selling teddy bears, calling cards, I mean, all kinds of just basic goods. And they had a family business called Parsons Paraphernalia, and it was successful.
Okay, that's the best name.
Isn't it? Like, and I, and even when I met him and we started dating, we've been married for 17 years now, together for 20. I used to work the family business. So I would go up to Detroit. We were working graduations, and just think about how many families have, children graduating, and they make impulse purchases because they didn't plan. So they need flowers, they need cameras, they need all this stuff to give the graduates. So we would work graduations. And when I tell you, they had like a monopoly on these graduations, because his father, my father-in-law, may he rest in peace, was an incredibly savvy businessman, and really showed my husband the ropes around entrepreneurship. So I think the two of us teaming up together around Yardstick Management was such a blessing, because I did a lot of the strategy behind the business, but my husband was in it from day one, doing the hard work of executing. And I learned from my early days at Procter & Gamble from one of the former CEOs that execution is the only strategy that the customer or the consumer sees. So you can come up with all this pie in the sky strategy, Nancy, but if it can't be executed, you can't grow the business.
Well, and that's the terrifying aspect of it, right? And when you have the security of your current situation, when you're doing so well as a leadership consultant, it's almost terrifying to kind of take these leaps. Fortunately, both of you had role models in different ways of people, but it's interesting because those were very much product based, whereas Yardstick is a whole different type of business. Like when you started explaining this and saying this, when you and your husband were first coming up with the inkling of the idea to begin your consulting businesses. Also, I would like to say that when you would have started your first consulting business, I would say people didn't even know what consulting was, especially in our community. Did you have to do a lot of explaining to people about what it is that like consulting actually was and why you need to pay for it?
Well, Nancy, let me just start by saying probably the bigger issue is people knew what consulting was, but they thought that's what people do when they're looking for a job, because either they've been fired or they're in between jobs, and so they just go consult.
Oh my goodness! Oh my God, that's hilarious.
Think about it. It's
So
like
people
I'm
are like
consulting.
thinking, "Oh, girl, you must have got fired."
Right.
Oh no.
Yes, and we had to, the bigger issue was convincing people that we're starting a company, a firm. And so, yeah, there was a lot of education around that. And I often joke that part of entrepreneurship, a big part of it, is just staying in business, because that is what we had to do to convince people, no, we're serious. And you start to, get more business under your belt, you get more notoriety, people start to know, the brand, and you have business flowing your way. But that takes time, and it takes at least 5 years to really start to build up that credibility. But the early days, yeah, we had people who thought we were out of work, had people who were like, that's a silly idea. We have a dear friend who used to be at McKinsey, because Bain, McKinsey, BCG, these are large multinational consulting firms. And he was like, well, that's a stupid idea. Like, why would you do that? And there's all these other, companies out there. But we forged ahead and we had a vision, and we stuck with it.
And so that's interesting. So what's really interesting about the naysayers, a lot of us deal with haters. And it's so hard because the amount of time it takes to believe in yourself. When you say 5 years, that is an investment. That is a long period of time. You actually held on to the company for 10 years. So you had 5 years of proving it and then 5 years of growth. And then when you got to around the 10-year mark, yardstick management, the person who originally had said, well, that's a dumb idea, they had to eat crow because you were able to successfully sell the business in a very lucrative deal, correct?
Yes, we were. We absolutely were. And I don't even know if that individual remembers, but I saw him about 2 weeks ago. So
I would have been like, bro, do you remember?
oh, please. He was so proud of us and so happy for us. And here's the thing, though, Nancy, what I realized about some of the haters is that it's not always coming from a negative place. People
Yes.
are giving you advice based on their experience, based on their fears, based on their beliefs, all these things. They're not you. And so if you know that you know that you know that you know that you've got a bigger sort of purpose and passion, you stay the course. And ultimately, what yardstick management was about was changing the game for marginalized people and those who had been historically disadvantaged, like us, but doing it in a professional business setting through the context of management consulting. And that was like revolutionary because most management and strategy consultants are white men. Most of them don't have the lived experiences that my husband, myself, the team that we built had. And so they just couldn't tackle the problems, like the big, meaty business problems that these organizations were facing through the same kind of innovative lens that we brought. So truly, Yardstick was about disrupting a space that needed to be disrupted. And quite frankly, that's the same thing that Fearless Fund was about.
And that's the beauty of it. So what I love about this for anyone listening is the building off of an initial failure of a consulting firm, but the lessons learned from that to build yardstick management and the fortitude to keep pushing, the recognition, sometimes in hindsight, sometimes at the same time, that people's advice might seem derogatory or negative, but it's just them speaking their perspective and their inability to see what you can see. And I think a lot of us need to hear that, right? And then the beauty of it is actually some of that negativity towards what y'all were doing, which led you to create the Fearless Fund, because here you are, you've got this company, you've got this dream, you've got this vision, you're fighting the fight, you know it's going to take a lot of years. Getting the funding for this was not easy.
Oh, no. Well, so Fearless Fund was incredibly challenging to get funding for because I think a lot of people don't
But even
understand.
before Fearless Fund, but for Yardstick, excuse me, but quickly, because
Oh,
that's actually, with Yardstick management, you ended up bootstrapping it because you were
oh
having
yeah.
a difficult time. That's the,
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
that's the beauty of it. I think if you look at Ayana's story, it's a whole bunch of absolutely nots that she and her husband had to work around. And then what we all try to do is then she passes the baton down and helps the next generation, because it ended up being, and also some of these problems end up being blessings because you had to bootstrap Yardstick because you couldn't get funding. Is this correct?
No,
A lot of the
this is correct. And in the early days, it wasn't even this idea of venture capital funding. Like who even thought about that? For us, it was about small business loans. And ultimately down the line, we had lines of credit and things like that. But no, we 100% bootstrapped the business. And that is why we decided very strategically early on that Ebby, my husband, would be 100% in the business day to day, and I would also go work. So I always kept other jobs because I needed to be able to bring home some of the, security, it's never fully security, but some of the security of a full-time job. And so
And in
that's
some
how
way, it's a way
we
your
did
own
it.
line of credit was your job.
Bingo. That part.
Exactly. And that's why, listen, if there's anything a mompreneur needs to know, because a lot of people, you cannot quit your job if you have kids. That's irresponsible a lot of the times. If there's any proof that you can do it, look to this woman,
Yeah.
because here you are, your job ends up being your line of credit and your security while your husband is full time on this. And on top of it, eventually it grows. And as it grows, you see this hole and you start to understand venture capital and you start to get a little miffed.
That's right.
That's how
That's absolutely
fearless
right.
that's how fearless fun comes about, because you are seeing all of this knowledge that you have and all of these opportunities and all of this growth in your very successful company, and this was almost impossible. You had to have all your pieces.
No, this is so true, Nancy. And what's so crazy about Fearless and how that came about, if we just go back maybe 3 years before that, so around 2016, at the time I was working at the World Economic Forum. So the World Economic Forum is one of the most powerful organizations in the world, headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. And basically, what they do is they host this annual meeting in Davos, Switzerland, every January, where 1,000 of the most powerful people, so think heads of state, presidents of countries, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, chairmen of those companies, presidents of the preeminent universities, etc., come together and they create the global agenda. So these people say what is going to be important for the world, whether that's food security and agriculture, environmental sustainability, gender parity, it runs the gamut. And I was doing some fascinating work, but guess what, Nancy? The people who were sitting around the rooms and making the decisions about what was important for the world, they didn't look like us. And so after 3 years of doing that work, while we had Yardstick, I decided to step down. And I did something pretty courageous that I'd never done before. I stepped down from my role without sort of having another full-time gig. And the reason why I wanted to sort of tell that story is because we moved our family. We were splitting our time between New York, Connecticut, and I was going back and forth between, Geneva, Switzerland, and many other parts of the world. But we moved our family to Atlanta. And we moved to Atlanta because we wanted to be closer to family. My mom is there. We also had cousins and aunts and all kinds of relatives and a support system there. But we also wanted to sort of figure out, what is this long-term game plan for us? Because we had Yardstick. At that same time, I came up with this idea and I was like, okay, I want to invest in other entrepreneurs, Black entrepreneurs. So my husband and I started talking and we were like, why don't we do a prize where we come up with an amount of money and they pitch for, this prize. I think I had the idea and then I pitched it to my husband and he was like, I don't know if that's it. And so then I was like, okay, I started reading and I learned about all of these angel investment opportunities. I share that because it didn't dawn on me. It never could have dawned on me that 3 short years later, I would be getting into venture capital. Because for me, when I was approached, and I was approached by my business school classmate to start this fund, I thought, well, I don't think that industry is for us, because all of the venture capitalists I see, they're white men, they went to Stanford or they went to Harvard, and how are we going to disrupt this thing? But what I quickly realized was we were very much the exact people that needed to disrupt the industry, because we knew these women. Why did we know these women? Because we were these women. And then on top of that, I quickly realized that venture capital was nothing more than a people business. And I know people, I've known people my entire life, that I've built my career on helping people, and investing in leaders and founders and CEOs. And oh, by the way, I knew lots of different types of businesses from my career as an operator. So there's a long-winded way of telling the story of sort of how we got to Fearless Fund, but that was it. I like to say I was sort of an accidental venture capitalist, because I didn't sort of seek it out, But it has been really rewarding to invest in these incredible women, many of whom I know you know.
Oh, I know. That's the beautiful thing. The importance of it being you is so key because if you see it, you can be it. Of course, you know, if you build it, they will come. And it reminds me of this is building on getting to have this venture capital fund is building off of the work that's been done for hundreds of years, right? Like for example, my father was a businessman and he had a difficult time securing loans too in the 60s when he was trying to do his business. He couldn't get banks to give him mortgages. And if it hadn't been for the belief of like a black owned local bank who's just like, all right, this is what we're doing, we would not have the business that we have. And it's one of those things where it's cyclical because you receive the funds and the belief in you is so important. You want to do right. Like it becomes you become family almost. Many of the people that speak of you and speak of the fund and speak of you and your co-founders, you all are more than just a way to get money. You are part of the business. You yourself, not just an entity.
Yeah, well, Nancy, I have to tell you that for me has been probably the most rewarding part of this work. And that is being in the trenches, working with these founders, because it's one thing to write a check, but it's another thing to be meeting with them on a monthly or a biweekly basis and really tackling these business challenges that they're having. Some that, I've seen before or maybe haven't seen, but I've consulted a lot of companies through some of these challenges. So that is really rewarding when you see the hard work pay off over time, just to support them in a way that they're not getting. They're not getting that support from, these larger VC funds that, quite frankly, have general partners that don't look like them and don't quite understand their businesses.
There have been so many incredible businesses that you've invested in. One of my favorite, of course, is Mompreneur and her daughter, beautiful curly me. Anyone should go back to season 1 and see that interview. It's absolutely wonderful. They actually talk about the Fearless Fund grant that was provided because one of the great things is you run the gamut in investments and you also run the gamut in the difference between an investment and a grant. There are many layers to everything that you all have done. What are some of your favorite wins over the time of this grant, of this of the
Of
Fearless
the fun.
Fund and
Yeah.
according?
Yeah, yeah. Well, Nancy, I'll also make the distinction too for the viewers so that they sort of
Yes.
understand how the organization is structured. So, the Fearless Fund is the for profit venture capital fund where we take an ownership stake in a company for equity. And so that is what I co founded. Now, there's a separate related entity called the Fearless Foundation. And the Fearless Foundation gives charitable grants to entrepreneurs, many of them Black women and women of color. But there's sort of no strings attached. And what's been fascinating to watch is just how many lives have been touched across both of those. But I must say, I have not had any direct involvement in the Fearless Foundation or running that. My involvement was, founding the Fearless Fund as a venture capital fund and really working with those founders. But, some of the women that I would highlight, they were just featured in Elle magazine. So check that out if you guys haven't seen it. But Melissa
Oh,
Butler, who is out of Detroit, the Lip Bar, she's incredible. Nikeo Greco, who started 13 Loon, is also another incredible founder. You guys know already Pinky Cole, Slutty Vegan, what we've done there. There's just so many. We've invested in more than 40 companies. And so I get a lot of, just a lot of reward from seeing these women thrive.
I love that. And it's interesting because it is easy to mix up the different elements of it. Like you said, there's the foundation, there's the fund, there's all these different things. We were talking about the difference between venture capital and loans. For our audience, some of whom want to start a business, but just again, it's the beginning phase. Explain the different ways because there's what you did, you bootstrapped. There's bank loans, there's lines of credit, there's venture capital, which is the Fearless Fund. So for the audience who is very hopeful of their dreams of their own lip bar or their own slutty vegan, what are the differences in the types of funding? And generally speaking, when you're first starting out, what's the best case scenario for you?
Yeah, Nancy, that's a great question. Well, you did a pretty good overview yourself, going through, different types of funding. But the way to think about it is there's debt funding. So the way to think about debt funding is these are loans. So this could be a small business loan, it could be a line of credit, but you borrow that money, you've got to pay it back. There are also many grant programs. The great news about grant programs is that's free money. So those are charitable donations. You apply for those grants, you get those grants, that's free money in your pocket. So think, scholarships, if you will, for business. The third is equity financing. And that is sort of where my lane was with Fearless Fund. And the way to think about equity financing or equity funding is I give you this money, but there are strings attached because I expect your company to grow and to get a return on that investment. And I'm taking an ownership stake, typically a minority ownership stake of your business. There's also strings attached, by the way, with debt, because if you don't pay that debt back, you default. But those are the three types that I talk mostly about, and I encourage entrepreneurs to explore. Now, out of those three, hands down, grants are the way to go, because if you can get a grant, that is free money that doesn't have to be paid back versus debt financing like a small business loan or equity financing. I am also a huge proponent of bootstrapping, and I'll tell you why. Because as soon as you start bringing investors into your business, you are giving up some level of control of your business. And over time, if this could be, sort of a multi-million dollar, let's say $50 million business, $100 million business and up, that's not a bad thing. Sometimes you need to relinquish that control to be able to grow that big. But if you have a pretty steady state lifestyle business idea that you're trying to grow, and let's say you want to have a steady state $1 million business or a $2 million business, just know that getting investors is going to dilute or detract from your ability to get a return on your investment. And so that's why I'm a big proponent of those two that I talked about, grants and bootstrapping where you can.
Where do people find grants? It's so funny because a lot of people think, do I need to have my own grant writer? What if I can't afford that? Can I just get the grant? Like, where do people tend to look for these?
I mean, honestly, I Google. So I would strongly encourage.
I love how every single interview, this is very important, every single interview, at some point someone says Google.
Yeah, because here's the thing. Listen, as an entrepreneur, if you haven't learned how to be resourceful, then you haven't learned entrepreneurship. And sometimes it really is as simple as Googling, where can I find grants in my local area? There are so many accelerator programs, incubators for small businesses that help you learn about grant opportunities. I just was asked to be a nominator. I don't think I can divulge what the organization is, but they have hundreds of millions of dollars. And they have a fellowship program where there are no strings attached, but for 5 years, they're giving a significant amount of money to budding creative entrepreneurs. And so these opportunities are out there. And this is why, as an entrepreneur, as much as you are focused on the day-to-day of running your business, you've also got to be focused on finding the money that's going to enable you to grow. So that would be my advice.
That. And the ROI
you can also
so
go
to
the fearless.fund website though too, because there are some links to grant opportunities as well.
Amazing. Yes, there's the ROI on free money is so high because business loans, y'all think mortgages have a high interest rate. Business loans are insane.
That part. Yes.
So here's the thing. You got to focus on your business. You got to focus on your money. You got to focus on all that stuff. But here at Mompreneurs, you also got to focus on your family. And when we look at all the success, when we hear all that you all have done, the question a lot of people might have is, how do you do it all? How have you done this over the past 12, 13 years and be a mom, a wife, a human? Because I laugh because this question's a little dicey. I said, which comes first, mompreneurship or being a mom, like entrepreneurship or motherhood? And you're like, Where's the nebulous conversation in that question?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I was laser focused on business and entrepreneurship earlier, like so before I became a mom. And honestly, Nancy, my story around motherhood is that when I was in my early 20s and also just coming up in high school, I never dreamt of being a mother. As a matter of fact, I thought, okay, I'm not going to have kids. And then I was like, husband, I'm so focused on my career. I don't even know if I'm going to have that. And so I have to tell you the surprise that all of my family and closest friends felt when they first met my now husband, Ebby. I mean, he was my boyfriend, and they're like, wait a minute, this career driven businesswoman is over here talking about, I think I like him. And then at some point when he asked my mother and my father for my hand in marriage, and they were like, well, my mom was like, well, did you ask her brothers? Because they got to sign off too. I have two brothers. So that just tells you like how much my family was like, oh, she's getting married. And so also imagine the surprise to then, become a mother. And it has been the greatest joy of my life. I'm so glad we had kids, and I'm so glad we have our daughters, because they're exact opposites, and they have their own unique brilliance. And I just can't imagine, I can't imagine life without them. But I will say this, juggling the businesses that I've juggled, it can't be done without a really strong support system. So I'm an early adopter of so many things. And going back to the naysayers and the haters, I have friends and family who were like, wait a minute, you got a nanny? Okay, so our 12-year-old, we had a live-in nanny when she was born. So I've had live-in nannies, live-out nannies, au pairs. We're back to live-in nannies, but we've had that. Regular house cleaning.
Was actually upset when I got a maid. She could, and that was, and it's so interesting. And in our community, for step one, for many of our families, this is all novel and new. Okay,
yes.
So we can understand, but that actually can hold you back, because the main thing that people say is what you said. You cannot scale your business if you do not bring help in. But yet, bringing help in as a woman, as a mother, we're supposed to be having our finger on everything. You don't clean your own toilet? You think you're too good to clean your own toilet?
Right.
No, I think I'm too busy.
That part. I gotta tell you, they didn't get it. And I'm telling you, I had so many conversations with, again, family members, really. And so I outsourced the, not the child care, because people think, okay, you got a nanny, your kids aren't going to know you. Like, that is such a huge myth. Like, our kids, we have so much fun together. But yeah,
we have fun together because somebody's cleaning that toilet.
There you go. Listen, I've had all kinds of meal prep services, chef for hire this, but that is how I was able to do it, is having that support system so that I could maximize my time when I'm working and maximize my time with my kids. And then the other thing for me is that I decided early on that I didn't care how many hours I needed to work during the week. My weekends were going to be sacred. And so I kept that, my weekends sacred, family time. But yeah, there were many days where I was 12 hours, 13 hours, 14 hours. Is it tomorrow yet? Which, takes a toll. It really does take a toll on you, physically. But, you do what you got to do to build a better life for your family.
And you had a vision. At what point did you realize that your vision was being realized? Like, how old were your kids? Where were you? What happened? What was the moment where you realized we made good choices?
Our 10th anniversary, when we had one of our Yardstick Management Institutes, and we had all of these incredible, business leaders and entrepreneurs from all around the country gathered in, I think we were in Sea Island, Georgia at the Cloister, and we had fireworks. And it was during that institute, because I created a note in my phone in 2014 where I really articulated what I saw for the future of the organization and what we could be. And that was two years in. And I referred back to it And I was like, oh my goodness, God is real, because we have achieved 80, if not 90% of that. So that was when we knew. That is definitely when we knew.
I love it. And so all the sleepless nights, all of the side eye, all of the wondering it has panned out, and you can look at your kids. And when you think, what does your mother say when she sees all of this? Because you're operating in land. My mommy always says when certain things happen, she jokingly says, but she means it. She's like, "Getting out of my league." That's a
Yeah,
very southern way to look at it,
yeah,
but genuinely, when you have to embody your ancestors' wildest dreams.
yeah, yeah. Well, my mother is so proud, and I think she sees so much of herself in me, and I now see so much of her in me. And growing up for her, she grew up in Tuskegee, Alabama, so there was so much Black excellence all around. And I think for her, she saw it. I don't know. She never articulated what saw me becoming, but she always knew. She always knew I was going to be highly successful in whatever I did. So she's living her best life. We live in the Caribbean now, and I got to tell you, my mom has probably been here 5 times this year. So
I mean,
she's
it's
loving it.
amazing. All her hard work paid off, and all your hard work's paying off. Because when your girls see you, do you think that what type of life do you think they'll live? Do you think they'll follow in your footsteps, or do you think that they're just gonna be carefree and
You know what?
YOLO?
It is my hope that they are carefree, and I want them to be healthy, happy, self-sufficient adults. So that is what we are focused on. And if they can be healthy, happy, and self-sufficient, and sort of living their best lives, doing what makes them happy, and hopefully contributing to making the world a better place, that's all I can ask for as a mom.
Hopefully they will be at Davos. You know what I mean? Like that's the
Right.
fun thing, right? Like because they want to be, not because they have to be, making some adjustments to be more inclusive. And I think that's what's really fun about mompreneurship, right? Because why people do things, people have their own impetus for the reasons they work so hard or take so many risks or fail and then try again. And oftentimes, sometimes it's, to prove something to themselves. But for most of us, it's to help our children have a better life. My dad always says, "I'm just trying to insulate you from racism." I'm trying to, I'm trying
Good.
to.
Good luck with that.
I was like, he didn't live to see that happen. But that's the beauty of it. So, what is your advice to people listening who want their children to grow up carefree, who want to dig their toes into the ground and put their unique talents to work with their specific gifts to build their brands and their businesses? Any advice that you have for them?
Yeah, my advice is that freedom to be carefree and do what you love requires money. And so that's the beauty of being financially free, because financial freedom takes the pressure off of you. It's you don't have to do what others do or what you've been told is the playbook, because you have the ability to sort of lean into your unique gifts and your passions and your talents. And so that's why I talk so much about about the need to build generational wealth, because that's the only way that we get there. And that affords us the ability to start to solve some of these collective challenges that we have as a community. There are so many disparities when it comes to access to healthcare, it comes to access to education, to opportunity, housing, all of these things. And imagine if we had more Black women who were wealthy, that could really lean into helping to solve some of these problems. So that would be my advice.
I'm claiming it. And you
Yes.
definitely have done your part. So good job. And you're not done yet, because I actually want to talk to you about your new stuff, and it fits in perfectly with my favorite segment. It's called Mompreneurs Manifestation, where I ask our guests what's next for you and what you're hoping comes next, and how we can help to manifest success in this endeavor for you.
Well, what is next, Nancy, is I'm writing my first book. It's taking a lot longer than I thought it would. So, and actually, my husband and I we're doing it together. I think that's what has made it
Aw.
it's made it unique, because I wanted us to both sort of tell our different origin stories, but then it's more than a memoir. It is origin stories and then coming together and building together and telling leadership and business lessons along the way. So that is in progress. So I know
I'm
you
so
know a thing or
excited for
two
you.
about books.
We'll talk offline. I got you, boo. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'll help you speed this process up. That's wonderful. And then you're not done with business yet. You've started
No.
your new thing, and we can't exactly talk about it yet. But can you give us a little inkling of what we can expect so we can be excited for you?
Absolutely. So right now, what I can talk about is AKP Management, which is a consultancy I've had actually for years, and then I stopped doing it and have it now. We will soon release and sort of launch the new thing that's tied to it, but it will be an organization that is focused on empowering and empowering the masses. I have a pretty lofty goal. I'd like to empower at least 5 million people over a 5-year period to be their best self. And to be your best self, that means financially fit, means physically fit, it means mentally fit, spiritually fit. And so that is sort of what it's about.
Sign us up. We're excited for you. Where can everyone find you and learn more about the work that you do?
Yeah, the best way to keep up with the latest news and happenings for me, you can go to my website, AyanaParsons.com. That's AyanaParsons.com. I'm also on Instagram, Ayana K. Parsons. And then I'm on LinkedIn as well. But those are the best ways to keep up with me.
I love it. We're so grateful. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your light and everything you've done for all of us and everything that you're still doing.
Thank you so much for having me, Nancy. It's been fun.
Yay! Okay, you heard her, everyone. Go follow her and figure out what she's up to. And thank you so much for listening to Mompreneurs. Just a reminder, a brand new episode goes live each Monday on Urban One Podcast Network, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit urban1podcast.com to learn more. That's urban1podcast.com. Mompreneurs is brought to you by the Urban One Podcast Network and MadameNoire. Created, produced, and hosted by me, Nancy Red. Executive produced by Allison McGovna and Tanya Hoffler-Moore. Produced and edited by Jiminique Miller.